My name is Ronaldo. I'm 39, and 2 years ago I made the biggest decision of my life. I moved to the United States. It feels like it was just yesterday, but in reality, it's been a roller coaster of emotions, surprises, and moments I never thought I'd experience. Coming from a middle-class family in India, I always had dreams of going abroad, seeing the world, and making something of myself. I had a good job back home, but the USA was calling. It wasn't just the idea of a better salary or living in a foreign country. It was the idea of possibility. That's what America represented to me. When I first stepped off the plane in San Francisco, I couldn't believe I was actually here. The airport was huge, big, and filled with people from all over the world. I remember looking around, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. I had no idea what lay ahead of me, but one thing was clear. I had a lot to learn. The first shock came when I tried to order a coffee. Back home, a cup of tea or coffee is simple. You go to the counter, ask for chai, and that's it. But here, when I walked into a Starbucks, I was overwhelmed by the choices. Tall? Romeo? Taylor? The Diaz? I stood there confused. Just coffee," I said awkwardly, and the people in line behind me started getting impatient. The Diaz gave me a polite smile, but I could tell she was waiting for me to make a proper decision. After a few more questions and some awkward guessing, I finally walked away with a plain black coffee. It wasn't what I expected, and it tasted bitter. But it was my first taste of America. That was just the beginning of my small confusions. Back home, we drive on the left side of the road, but in the U.S., it's the right side. I remember the first time I sat behind the wheel of a car here. My palms were sweating, and my heart was racing. I was so focused on staying on the right side that I missed a stop sign and nearly caused an accident. The guy in the other car honked loudly, throwing his hands up in the air like I just committed a crime. I waved apologetically, but he sped off without acknowledging me. "Well, welcome to driving in America." I had rented a small apartment just outside the city. It wasn't much, barely enough space for me and my suitcase. I remember looking around that first night, thinking, is this really it? Is this what I left home for? The apartment felt cold and empty, nothing like the warm, bustling home I had back in India. Back home, there was always someone around, my parents, my sister, even neighbors who just dropped by for a chat. Here, it was silent. I could hear the hum of the fridge and the occasional car driving by, but that was it. For the first time in my life, I was truly alone. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of trying to figure out how to live here. Everything seemed so expensive. I was used to bargaining back home, but here, prices were fixed, and they were high. I remember walking into a grocery store and staring in disbelief at the price tags. A loaf of bread cost nearly $5. In India, that same amount of money could buy you enough food for a whole day. I quickly learned that if I wanted to survive here, I had to budget carefully. My salary was decent, $60,000 a year. But after rent, utilities, and food, there wasn't much left for anything else. I had to share my apartment with a roommate to cut costs. But even that didn't leave much breathing room. Eating out was a luxury. A simple meal at a restaurant could easily cost $20 to $30. And don't even get me started on the tipping culture. In India, you leave a small tip if you're really happy with the service, but here, tipping is expected, and it's usually 15 to 20%. The first time I went out to eat, I didn't leave a tip because I didn't know, and the waiter gave me a look I'll never forget. I felt terrible once I realized my mistake, but it was a learning experience. I learned that not everyone who smiles at you is your friend. People are polite. Yes, they say hi even if they don't know you, and sometimes they give compliments just to be nice. But that doesn't always mean they have your best interests at heart. I had to learn to trust my gut, to recognize the difference between genuine kindness and surface-level politeness. There were people who supported me wholeheartedly, like Adam, but there were also people who didn't care if I succeeded or failed. Through it all, though, I realized the importance of family. No matter how far I was from home, my parents were always there for me. Their phone calls, their words of encouragement, and even their gentle scolding kept me grounded. They reminded me of who I was and where I came from. On tough days, I'd think about all the sacrifices they made so I could have a better life. That thought alone gave me the strength to keep pushing forward, even when things got tough. After the breakup, life slowed down a little, but not in a bad way. I had more time to focus on myself, my work, and most importantly, my English. You'd think after living in the U.S. for a while, I'd have it all figured out. But no. English is like a tricky puzzle, always throwing new challenges my way. One day, I'd feel like I had it under control, and the next, I'd find myself completely lost in a conversation. Take, for example, this one time at work. It was a typical morning, and I was sipping my coffee when my boss walked up and said, "Ronaldo, could you give me a ballpark figure on the project costs?" I stared at him blankly. Ballpark figure? Were we suddenly talking about baseball? I tried to keep a straight face and nodded, pretending I understood, but inside I was panicking. I Googled ballpark figure under the table during the meeting and found out it just meant an estimate. Phew, close call. I laughed about it later, but these little moments kept me on my toes. But it wasn't all confusion. There were plenty of fun and quirky things I loved about living here. For one, Americans love their holidays. Every month, it felt like there was some new excuse to celebrate. Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, it was nonstop. Halloween was the most bizarre one for me. Back in India, I'd seen it in movies, but nothing prepared me for the reality of grown adults dressing up in costumes and roaming the streets. Adam and I decided to throw a little Halloween party at our apartment, and he convinced me to dress up as Spider-Man. Let's just say wearing that tight suit was an experience. Halfway through the party, the mask became so unbearable I ripped it off, much to the amusement of my friends. Adam, on the other hand, dressed as a giant hot dog and spent the entire evening telling people to relish the moment. It was so bad it was funny. Funny moments like that became a part of my everyday life. Once I went to a drive-thru for the first time. I had seen them in movies but never experienced it myself. I was so nervous about getting the order right that when the lady asked, "Do you want fries with that?" I panicked and said, "No, I'll just take the ketchup." The lady at the window gave me the most confused look, and I drove away with only ketchup packets and no fries. I laughed about it all the way home, realizing how ridiculous I must have sounded. Speaking of food, American meals were something else. Breakfast here was a big deal. In India, my breakfast usually consisted of something light, like parathas or idli. But here, people started their day with pancakes, eggs, bacon, and a mountain of syrup. I tried it once, but by the time I finished, I felt like I needed to go back to bed instead of starting my day. I did, however, fall in love with their sandwiches. A turkey sandwich for lunch became my go-to, but I had to be careful. The portions here were massive. I couldn't believe how much food they served, and sometimes I'd end up with leftovers for dinner. Life in the U.S. wasn't just about funny moments and food, though. It taught me some hard lessons, too. One of the most unexpected things I learned was how lonely it could feel, even in a country full of people. You'd think that with all the friendliness, people saying hi on the street, neighbors waving, colleagues asking how your weekend was, I'd never feel alone. But sometimes, the polite greetings didn't go beyond that. They were just that. Greetings. It wasn't the deep connection I craved. There were nights when I'd come back to my apartment, sit on the couch and feel this wave of homesickness hit me. I'd call my parents sometimes just to hear their voices, and it would help. But other times, I just had to sit with that feeling and remind myself that this was all part of the journey. One thing that helped pull me out of those lonely moments was a dog. Not my dog, unfortunately, but Adam's dog, a golden retriever named Max. Returning to the city, I carried that sense of gratitude with me. I had learned to appreciate the little things, like sharing a meal with friends or watching the sunset from my apartment balcony. My English was improving, and I began thinking about how I could help others who were on the same journey I had been on. One night, as I sat on my couch with Max curled up next to me, an idea struck me. What if I started a YouTube channel to share my experiences and help others learn English? I had seen so many channels dedicated to teaching English, but I wanted to add my unique perspective. The funny moments, the struggles, the lessons learned along the way. The next day, I created my channel and started filming my first video. I talked about my journey to the USA, the cultural differences I encountered, and even shared some of the funny moments I'd experienced along the way. I poured my heart into the video, hoping to inspire others who felt lost or overwhelmed, just like I had felt when I first arrived. To my surprise, the video resonated with many people. Comments began pouring in, with viewers sharing their own stories and thanking me for my honesty. I felt a sense of purpose. This was what I was meant to do. With each new video, I gained more followers and felt a growing community around me. I was no longer just a boy who moved to the USA. I was a storyteller, a friend to those navigating their own paths. Eventually, my channel took off. I found joy in creating content that was not just educational, but also entertaining. I incorporated humor, sharing embarrassing stories and the things I still struggled with, like navigating social situations or ordering food. I brought my viewers along on my adventures, whether it was trying a new food or exploring a new city. Through it all, I never forgot the importance of connection. I continued my friendship with George, and our walks became a regular part of my week. He shared stories of his travels, and I shared my experiences with learning English. Our friendship blossomed, and he became a mentor to me in many ways. He taught me about life and its adventures, the value of sharing stories, and how every experience, good or bad, shaped who we are. As the seasons changed, so did my life. I learned to forgive, and let go of the past. I still thought about Amanda occasionally, but instead of sadness, I felt a sense of closure. I was grateful for the love we shared and the lessons it taught me about relationships and myself. One evening, as I sat in my favorite cafe with a warm cup of coffee, I reflected on my journey. I realized that life in the USA had transformed me. I had learned to be more open, more resilient, and most importantly, to cherish the connections I made along the way. I felt proud of how far I'd come, from the boy who arrived with uncertainty to the young man who found his voice and purpose. In that moment, I made a promise to myself. I would continue to share my journey, inspire others, and never stop learning. I understood that life would always be a series of ups and downs, but each experience was an opportunity for growth. With Max by my side and a world of possibilities ahead, I felt ready to embrace whatever came next. And so, as the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the city, I smiled, knowing that my journey was just beginning. Thanks for joining me today on my English channel. If you found this lesson helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon to stay updated with all our latest videos. Keep practicing, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Happy learning, everyone!